Hello everyone, let us now discuss how can we solve this problem. Find all possible recipes from given supplies. So here we are given with some recipes, right? Here we are given with n different recipes initially. Now you are given a string array recipes and a 2D string array ingredients. So ith recipe has the name recipe I and you can create it if you have all the needed ingredients from ingredients I. For example, take bread. Bread need flour and also yeast, right? These two are needed to make bread. Now, and you can create it if you have all the needed ingredients from ingredients I. Now, you have other recipes ingredients I. A recipe can also be an ingredient for another recipe. So as I said, for making a recipe of bread, you need flour and also yeast. And to make sandwich, you also need bread and also meat. So a recipe bread can also be the ingredient for another recipe like sandwich. Now, you are also given a string supplies containing all the ingredients that you initially have, and you have an infinite supply of all of them. So we are given with supplies. That means these ingredients, right? The initial ingredients, yeast and flour, these are the initial ingredients that I can get. I can take the supply for infinite times. So return a list of recipes that you can create. You may return the answer in any order. Note that two recipes may contain each other in their ingredients. So let us quickly look at this example and let us uh, take the answer firstly, right? Here we are given with ingredients are this and supplies are yeast, flour and corn. Now let me think how can I solve this problem. Here the recipes are given is bread. So the recipe is bread. Now for this recipe I need yeast and flour. For this I need yeast. So yeast and flour. So what I do initially, what was my brute force approach is I go through this bread or this recipe and get whether this is present or not in my supplies. Yeast is present, yes, yes, it is present. And flour is present, yes, it is present. So, if all the ingredients for a recipe are already present, then this should be pushed back into the answer. So, this is how my brute force approach was. But as they said, a recipe can be an ingredient for another recipe. So, let us look at this example to understand it clearly what they are saying. So supplies are yeast, flour and meat. Ingredients are this. Now let us see what are the recipes bread and sandwich. So let me take this bread initially. Bread and then sandwich, right? So bread need what are the ingredients needed for bread and sandwich what are the ingredients needed for sandwich. So bread need yeast and flour. And here if you see sandwich need bread and also meat. Now the problem is I can go through bread and I have yeast and flour as the ingredients in the supplies. But for sandwich I have bread and also I have meat. So for this bread I need to go again back to this bread and check whether bread is prepared or it can be made or not, and then I will mark this as the ingredient as contained. And I also have this meat and I need to check this in supplies, and if it is there then sandwich can also be made. But this won't work because it takes more time than usual. So let us see how can I solve this in an optimized approach. The first thing that came into my mind is doing in reverse order. So I have yeast, I have flour, I have meat, right? I have yeast, I have flour, and I have meat. Now, let us see what are the things that I need to make. Bread, and I also need to make sandwich. I also need to make burger. First thing, let me write what are the things I need to make. Bread. So, this needs two ingredients, yeast and flour. And then sandwich. This needs two ingredients, right? Bread and meat. And then burger. This needs three ingredients, sandwich, meat, and burger. If you see, bread needs two ingredients, yeast and flour. Sandwich needs two ingredients, bread and meat. Burger needs three ingredients, sandwich, meat, and bread. Now, my problem is, as I said, reverse order. I am thinking to solve this problem in a reverse order. Instead of going through recipes, and instead of getting a recipe and going through all the ingredients and checking whether supplies is it present in the supplies or not, I go through the supply. As I said, I am coming in the downwards from the top to bottom. Instead, I go from bottom to top. I go through the recipe yeast. Now, let us see what are the recipes that I can make by yeast. What are the recipes that include yeast as the ingredient? Listen clearly. What are the recipes that include yeast as the ingredient? Now, let us see what are they. What are for yeast? What are for flour? What are for meat? Now, let me write what are the ingredients or the recipes that I can make using yeast. Yeast is present for bread. Bread. I can make bread using yeast. So, I doesn't have any other time yeast. So, let us go through for flour. Flour is used to make bread. Flour is used to make bread. Now, after that, I have this meat. Meat is used to make sandwich and also burger. If you see clearly, here, first thing, bread. Yeast is used to make bread, and then flour is used to make bread, right? Now I have meat. Meat is used to make sandwich. Meat is also used to make burger. So let me write it here. Sorry. So meat is used to make sandwich and also burger. Now the first thing which I need to do is go through, as I said, I will go through from bottom to top. I will go through the ingredient, and if that ingredient is present in any recipe, my count will be decreased. Let me show you how. Yeast is required for bread. Let me go through the first thing, yeast. Yeast, it is present and it is needed. I am going through the supplies which I already have. Yeast is used to make bread. So one ingredient is present. So I'll decrement my requirements or dependencies. The ingredients which I want is decreased by one for bread. Now I go through the next ingredient supply. Here I have flour, right? I go through this bread. So bread is having dependency of 1. It is became now 0. What I need to do now? So at this point, bread can be made. What does this mean? Bread can be made. So what I need to do is I will use a queue so that I get what all the recipes that I can make. So I will use bread here. I have this bread here as it can be made. Now, instead of using this supplies every time, I will make this as available. Available. What are the available ingredients? Why available? Because instead of making only this yeast, flour, and meat, I also include this bread as an ingredient. As I said, recipe can also be used as an ingredient. So available I have yeast, I have yeast, and also I have flour, I have meat, and I also have bread, right? I have yeast, flour, meat, and bread. These are the available items or available ingredients. So I am counting this bread, the recipe also as an ingredient. Now let us go through what I else need to go through. I completed the supplies here, but if you see, I have this bread. So when I go through this bread, here, if you see, I have a bread here, I have this sandwich here, I have this bread again. So when I'm writing this, I not only write for yeast, flour, and meat which are present in supplies. I also have to write for what are the else things. So instead of going through supplies while writing this part, I go through the ingredients where I get the ingredient and I push recipe for that ingredient. So if I do that, let me do that for the remaining things. So let me do that from the first again, so that you can understand clearly. First thing, I got yeast. Yeast is used for bread. Now I got flour. Flour is used for bread. Then I got bread. Bread is used to make sandwich. Sandwich. Now meat is used to make sandwich. Now I have sandwich again as an ingredient, and sandwich is used to make burger. And now let us see, is anything repeated? Meat. So meat is already there. Meat is used for burger, and bread. Bread is already there. Bread is used to make burger, and nothing is repeated here. So instead of writing this like this, I would write instead like this. Yeast is used to make bread. Flour is used to make bread. Bread is used to make sandwich and also burger. So if I do that again, I would take something like I have I have bread, I have sandwich, I have burger, burger. Now burger, for burger I have 3 as the count, and for sandwich I have 2 as the count, and for bread I have 2 as the count. Now I'll do that again. For yeast I have ingredient yeast and I have bread. So go to bread and decrement the count as I have yeast to make bread. Now I have flour, and for flour I have this bread. So bread value becomes 0. At that moment, I have pushed back the bread into the available items. So that's how this algorithm works. Right? Bread is used to make, but before that, as I said, I go through yeast, flour, and then meat. I go through the supplies first, and then I go through this bread again. So for that, when I get an ingredient, I would push back into the queue. I would push this back into the queue, right? Now, let us see how can I solve this. So, instead I go through the meat. As I said, I go through the supplies first, and then I go through the recipes or the ingredients or the recipes as included as ingredients in a queue. I'll store that in a queue so that I go through this burger. I go through, sorry, it is bread, sorry, it is bread. So I go through this bread, and I will decrement the count for sandwich and also burger. Now let us first see about the meat. Firstly, meat I can decrement for sandwich, and I also can decrement for burger. So I will decrement for sandwich and it would become 1. I would decrement for burger and it would become 2. Now I have sandwich and burger. Still, my count is 1. Now, I have gone out of bounds for this supply. I go through this bread. This queue comes into picture after the supplies are ended. Now, I go through this bread which is in queue. Now let me go through this bread for once. I'll use this green color. Decrement the count for sandwich. I'll do that. Decrement the count for sandwich. It is 0. Decrement the count for burger and it would become 1. But if you see here, whenever I get a 0, here I got a 0 for bread. So why shouldn't I directly push this back into my answer? So it is a good idea that whenever I get any recipe which is having 0 as the count, I would push that back into firstly to the queue and then to the answer. Now, I also got a sandwich that I can make with the given ingredients. So, bread is removed. So, I have removed the bread from the queue and now I am pushing this sandwich back. Now, I have this sandwich again. Now, let me go through this sandwich and it is having only one recipe that can be made with this ingredient sandwich, that is burger. So, if I make the count as 0, then burger can also be made by these ingredients. So this is my answer. So what I need to do now, I have this burger, but do I have any ingredients or any recipe that I can make with burger? So this will be pushed or popped back, and our queue is empty. Now, let me write the algorithm step by step. How I solve this problem? First thing, I go through every ingredient. Yeast. For yeast, I push back this recipe bread. I push back this recipe bread. So, I should name it. I should name it something like recipe from ingredient. So, you can name it anything like recipe from ingredient. I have named that recipe from ingredient. Now, as I said, I need this recipe from ingredient. So for that, I would use an ordered map string, 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 comma, vector, string, so that I could store recipe from ingredient. So this is the first thing. Now, what I did initially, I go through this ingredients of I, and I go through every ingredient. For yeast and for flour, I would push back for this ingredient. I would push back the recipe into recipe from ingredient. Now, let us see how can I do that. Sorry. Second thing I did is go through ingredients in ingredients of I and push back recipe of I for every ingredient. So go through, instead I can write it like every ingredient in ingredients of I and push back recipe of I for every ingredient. Now this is made. For now this is completed at this point of time. But if you see, for bread I need 2 ingredients, for sandwich I need 2 ingredients, burger I need 3 ingredients. So it is nothing but for recipe of I, or here I need to take in degree. So I would name it as in degree, and for every time I get these ingredients of I, so that in degree of recipe of I recipe of I would be in degree of recipe of I would be ingredients of I dot size. Ingredients of I dot size. So this is the in degree which I need to take for every recipe. Now I have initialized this too. First thing which I did is going through the supplies. So let me do that and let me write it in the algorithm again. Go through the supplies. Now I'm going through the supplies. What I am doing here, I'm going through the yeast, flour, and then I go through the meat, and for every ingredient, sorry, for every recipe that can be made with this supply, let me write it. Go through supplies for every recipe that can be made with this supply. Supply might be yeast, supply might be flour, supply might be meat. So I would decrement the count in degree for the recipe. Now let me do that. For every recipe that can be made with this supply in degree of the recipe, for every, as I said, for every recipe, in degree of recipe would be decremented. But before that, let me decrement every time, and if it is 0, let me write it here. If so, if it is happened, then what I need to do, I need to do something like here. I have this recipe, so I would use that into available. I would use that into available ingredients. I would push back into available ingredients, and also I would push back into my queue. Before that, I need to initialize a queue of string queue. So when it is in degree of a recipe is 0, now push that recipe into available 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 dot insert recipe. Why available dot insert? Why not pushback? Because available is an unordered set of string, and also q dot push this recipe. This is very simple. If you know how can we solve this using this, it is called as a topo sort. Now here, when these are completed, these supplies are completed, I'm going through this queue. So I would write this while queue is not empty. While queue is not empty, I need to do something. So current will be queue dot front, and also I would push remove that from the queue. So now I have this flour, bread, and meat. I need to go through recipe from ingredient of for that. Let me say this. I have to go through recipe from ingredients, and I would need to decrement the count in degree count for this recipes. So let me write it for you. For every time, go through the recipes with the current ingredient. Now minus minus the same thing in degree. So I would simply uh, copy this and push or make it here. In degree of recipe is equal to 0 available dot insert recipe q dot push recipe. So after that, every time I have this result. So every time I am getting this available dot insert, I also need to use that into answer dot push back this recipe. So this is how you solve this problem, and also I would do this at this stage also. So at last, return our answer. So this is how you solve this problem. So if you want the link of the code, it is in the description. Go and check it. And if you like this video, do share it to your friends and do subscribe to my channel. Thank you.